roughly 55 years or maybe even more, Luke, the disciple of Paul and the accompaniment of Paul, wrote the Gospel of Luke. Now I want to show you something this morning. 3 pictures. The top one is a picture of our Milky Way. So some dot in that picture is our solar system. And within that dot in that picture, we'll find Earth. And can you see Earth? But just imagine it's there, because it is there, but we can't see it always. So the picture below that is, if you focus further away, then you see different galaxies. Now, Milky Way is one galaxy. And every dot in the middle picture is a galaxy. And that picture makes, all those galaxies makes up a universe. And then when you go further out, if it was possible, we would have the representation, that's just a representation, not a real picture of what it looks like, of the different galaxies and universes within this cosmos. So if you work from the bottom back to the top, how small are we in the vastness of this cosmos? And all of that we call God. How big is God? And within that dot, within a dot, within a dot, within a dot, we find stories. We find people telling us things after they've heard it themselves. Like Paul, he said, I give you what has been given to me, a story. We find commentaries on those stories that is intertwined within the storylines. And we find folklore, traditional stories within different cultures that's interwoven, different languages that plays a role within that storytelling. And they say in the time that Luke was written, the Gospel of Luke was written down, there already existed more or less 30 different Gospels. We know about Mark and Matthew, that's older than Luke, that already existed. We also know about the Q source, which we don't have, but we know it existed because both Luke and Matthew used the Q source as a source of information, as commentaries on the life of Jesus. So if we take all of that into account, so within the dot of the dot of the dot, we find the gospel that we've read this morning. And we stand with it, and some of us will even kill to defend it. Do you grasp the tininess of what we are talking about? But do you also grasp the greatness of what we call God? He is truly not an old man on a throne on the other side of the clouds. Because if we look at those pictures, we can't even see the clouds, let alone the throne hall of God as it has been described to us in the Old Testament. And all of this creates difficulty for us to understand the true meaning of these Gospels that came to us through various means and then it's been written down within certain circumstances. The Gospel of Luke that we've read this morning about the temptation of Christ, you will see there's a certain order in which the temptation follow the other one. If you go and read the Gospel of Matthew, the same history, there's a different order. Have you noticed that? Did you know that? If you put the two against each other, there's a different order. So the question is, why in the first place do we have the temptation of Christ or the temptation of Jesus? Why do we read it during the time or at the beginning of Lent? Other than maybe because it reflects the 40 days of preparation of Christ before his ministry starts, and we are in the preparation time to celebrate Easter Sunday morning, the Resurrection Sunday. But what is very important is the fact that Jesus was tempted. Why is that important? Because if he was this distant God, as big as these pictures that you see up there, nobody can tempt God. Who tempts God? Who's bigger than that? So God cannot be tempted. There's no temptation where God is involved as God. So the very temptation of Jesus shows us his humanness. And the moment we see his humanness, we can relate with it. So that's the meaning of the temptation of God. We relate with what happened to him. And as we go through this morning, you will find yourself somewhere in this picture, if you are honest. But sometimes we feel like, why did he let this happen? You know, he's the Son of God. Just before the temptation, he was baptized by John the Baptist at the river Jordan. He saw the light. It came into him. It enlightened him. And he heard the words of God saying, "This is my beloved Son." So he must have been on a very high. You know, I'm the Son of God. I have the light in me. I have powers. So we would expect this. Jesus Christ, superstar. And wouldn't it have been a beautiful story if he approached the temptation from that position saying, "Who are you, devil? I'm the superstar. Go away. No temptation for me." But yet, he allows it because by becoming part of that temptation, by working through it, he shows us, because we are asked to follow him, so he shows us how to go through our own temptations. And it makes the life of Jesus relevant to our lives. Otherwise, it was just a distant God living a life which doesn't speak to us and has nothing to say to us. But the true picture of Jesus at that stage was not this. It was more like this. This is a person after 40 days of hunger without food in a very hostile wilderness area with a blistering sun without shelter. So this would be more the picture of Jesus at that stage. And at that stage, when he was really depleted from all energy, from all spirit, from all powers that he had, then the temptation happens. At the Monday discussion group, we said, the moment before sunrise is the darkest moment of the day. That is how we feel about the history of the world today, that we are in the darkest era. I think every generation feels that. The darkness is just so overwhelming. But remember that just after that, the sun breaks through. So having that picture in your mind of Jesus suffering for 40 days, is that how our Lent looked like? In our fancy cars, on our way to Costco or No Frills to buy all the food we need, take it home, come in home and prepare it on our electric stove while the heating of the house is running and there's no cold or blistering ice that can hurt us? Is that the picture we have of us? And that is the picture we have of Jesus. So our Lent is actually very far removed from what he went through for his preparation for his ministry. His whole life was in that. That is devotion. That is concentration on what lies ahead. And if we go into this darkness that visited him in his moment of need, we go back to the Hebrew text and the Aramaic, and we find the word choshech. Now, choshech is what we translate in English with darkness. Why do we speak about darkness? Because due to the fact that the different stories in the different Gospels differ from each other, we don't really know what are the true facts, how it happened, because Luke, 55 years after the crucifixion, so this gives you more or less 58 years after the temptation, he was not there. He didn't sit with a notebook taking notes of what's happening with Jesus. Neither did Matthew or Mark or anybody else that wrote the gospel. They were not there. We do not know the facts. We hear the stories, we hear the commentaries, we hear the thinking, but we do not know the facts. So the story cannot be about the facts, because as we also know, Jesus only talked through parables. He only taught through parables. So this must be one of his teachings through a parable. So the facts is not really important. What is important is the message. And what is the message? In his time of need, darkness visited him. In that time, the people would describe it as the devil. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about Jesus coming down from the mountain into the town, and a little boy that had epilepsy fell in a fire, burned himself very badly. And what did the people say? Oh, it's an evil spirit in that boy. That was the thinking of the time. So that's why this is presented to us in the gospel as Jesus being tempted by the devil. But Jesus is being tempted by the evil, dark forces within himself. And that is why we go to the Hebrew and Aramaic word of choshech, because what does it mean? We find it in Genesis 1, where it says that the darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So right at the beginning, the first thing we meet when we talk about this earth, we meet darkness. And that darkness calls the light into being. Because what did God do? The first thing he did is he brought into this darkness the light. The light is not visible if there was no darkness. And that's why choshech means so much to us, because the Hebrew word choshech means a violent movement within that try to pull you into disharmony with the world where you find yourself in. A violent movement within us, pulling us into disharmony with the world we live in. That is what Hebrew word choshech mean, and the Aramaic word the same. That is what darkness is. It is a violent movement that pulls you to be out of harmony with everything that is, out of harmony with the first pictures that we look at when we say, that is God. All the dots on those pictures, that is God. All the universes, all the galaxies, all the solar systems, that is God. And when the darkness, the violent movement within us gets the hand or the control of this body, we move out of harmony with that God, with that absolute everything. So how did this darkness pull Jesus? Remember him sitting in that picture, hungry, probably on the verge of sickness, probably on the verge of losing faith, being alone in the desert area and the wilderness. And then that inner voice telling him, why do you stand for this? I mean, you're the Son of God. No, just order these stones to become bread and eat. Feed yourself. Because within all of us, there is this darkness, this violent movement pulling us into a direction of being in control. If you control the food chain, you control the world. If you control food, you control people. Keep your eye on the powers in this world. What do they try to control? If you control food, you control people. The first temptation is this Jesus being confronted by this darkness within him, saying, you have the powers as the Son of God. Why do you take this? Just make the bread and be victorious. Be in control. And then the devil showed him all the kingdoms. Now in the Gospel of Matthew, it says he took him up to the highest mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and says, I give you this if you bow down and worship me. If you give that power to me. How many times do we give our powers away? Because we do not want to have the responsibility. It's easier for other people to decide on our behalf, because that takes the responsibility away from me. We had a discussion the other day, and I said, how I long for the days when I was at school. Getting up, getting dressed. The biggest issue is, did I do my homework? Coming home, food is ready. Clothes are washed. No responsibilities. Mom and dad looked after everything. Isn't that just life? So the temptation is always there to urge you, to pull you with a violent movement into the direction to put you out of control of yourself, to give away your responsibility, to give away your way of making decisions for your own life, because it is just so much easier. And then Jesus says, no, I take responsibility, and I know everything is about God. I'm not going to worship you, the darkness, so that you decide for me what I should do. And then he took him up to the temple and says, well, you have the power, just order the angels to come and save you and make yourself famous. How wonderful would it be if we all were rock stars? You know, you walk down the street and everybody take pictures of you. Look at that person. We want fame. We want our names to be on the lips of everybody, because it gives you a purpose. It gives you a reason to exist if everybody knows you. And Jesus says, that's not necessary. You don't need that. I don't need to order the angels to protect me, because I'm already protected. The darkness calls in the light. And the light is what I have received at the baptism at the River Jordan. I am the light. And when we start to follow Jesus, then that message refrain in our heads, I am the light. I am the Son of God, or the daughter of God. There was an alternative, and the alternative is what Jesus chose. He did not choose fame. He did not choose power. He did not choose control. He chose service. Self-sacrificing service. And his whole life after that became self-sacrificing service. Where he went, he took the message. What he did, he showed it. Self-sacrificing service. And there is where we find the temptations of our days. There is we find ourselves when we say, oh, the dumb ones to the south of our border, you know, we are so much better. Oh, those Europeans, they don't know what they are talking about. Those Africans, they are completely lost. Closer to home, my car is bigger than my neighbor's. My garden, manicured. We are always busy with this, putting ourselves on a pedestal. And I think that is where the darkness visits us the most. Most often, it will try to urge us to take this ego and live the ego life. I am brilliant. I am this human being with all these things I have accumulated, and I know better than anybody in the world. Although when we look at ourselves and our own lives, we have to admit we stand in absolute ignorance because we don't know a thing. I take you back to the first pictures. A dot within a dot within a dot, and there you find yourself on this minuscule planet that is so small, nobody would even notice it if they look from outside into the cosmos. They won't say, oh, there's Earth, what a beautiful place. They won't even notice it. And yet here we are, ego-driven, and think this is the center of the universe, this is everything. Everything revolves around this town, this country, this government, this. And Jesus said, no. If the devil took him up to that mountain, the highest peak in the Himalayas, put yourself there in your minds and look over the world. You can see a couple of kilometers and then it's the horizon. You cannot see the whole world. So facts aside, it's not about the facts. We found ourselves in the miracle of life. We found ourselves in this picture. On the one side, the darkness. On the other side, the light. And if you look in the center and you look very carefully, there's two faces. The one faces the light and the other one faces the darkness. A very clever picture that's been drawn by somebody. And it describes to us the choshech that is always there. Our own darkness, our own forces that wants to push the ego into disharmony with the world. And on the other side, the light, what we call the I am, the breath of God, that pulls us into self-sacrificing service, into harmony with this world. And this is what life is about. And this is a miracle. Like Genesis 1 says, there was chaos, there was violence in this masses of water. And then the Spirit of God came over these waters and he said, stop this. I bring in the light. And it doesn't matter how dark your life is and how overwhelming the darkness in your life is. God says to you, stop this nonsense and let the light, the I am, shine. Because you're a light being in the miracle of life where you experience to be a human. A short experience. It goes by in the blink of an eye, but it has so much opportunities. So much that we can learn. So let us learn. Let us stop the ignorance during this Lent phase. And let us open our minds to understand who we truly are. And let us get control of the darkness in our lives, because it will always be there. And let the light shine wherever you go. Amen.